Hey everyone, I've been getting a lot of questions about what it takes to actually put a codex together, and I've had a few people get really surprised by the sheer amount of work and the number of pieces that actually go into a normal book, so I wanted to show you the entire process. Hopefully you guys enjoy, and let's get started. Alright, first things first, grab the sheet of wood, big old top. I used to do a lot of taping and a lot of measuring with tape measures and stuff, but that took forever. So eventually I came up with a good old template system that definitely speeds things up a lot. Helps if I have a pen or a pencil handy. I like to do the back side first, because then if I do any mistakes or whatever, it's not a big issue because it's the back side. Some parts show, but generally I've got them pretty well spaced out that it's not an issue. Nice part is most of this stuff is water-based stain, so it's not very toxic or anything in that regard. But it does stain the hand, so I prefer not to look like I murdered some Smurfs or something. And then just start applying stain. Try not to go over the edges if I can. And if I do, not a big deal, just use a sander to try and remove it. Big key is actually having good wood that has enough of a thick layer that actually allows me to sand it without going into the next layer, because then the stain will not apply properly. So you kind of can't mess up, but got a little bit of forgiveness. With this brown stain, sometimes you really got to apply more than one coat. It really just doesn't like one coat half the time. You can always add more dye to make it a little bit darker, but then sometimes it's too dark and it just doesn't look like it's supposed to, or it looks black instead of brown. Some people have asked, why don't I use like a spray gun or something in the process, and that's partially because if you use a spray gun, it's all over the place. Two, it doesn't soak in evenly, whereas rubbing it in with a sponge like I'm currently doing, or a rag, generally just gets that nice uniformity look, as well as making sure that it actually gets deep into the grain like it needs to. And this can actually affect how well it engraves in the later process as well. Also dependent entirely on the wood is where there are end grains versus side grains and whatnot in the plywood, that it'll be a lot darker in some spots and a lot lighter in other areas, so it really helps to go over at least with multiple coats. The other crazy part is how much it will actually change over time as the air hits it. It'll usually become a lot more opaque. I guess opaque's the word. A lot more, not as bright and vivid as the green looks like now. I wish it would stay this way, but it's really hard to keep that. But that also makes it harder to see with the engravings if it is that way, so generally you kind of want it more opaque than anything. Alright, and that is the brown section. We'll see how it looks once it's dried a bit. Now we're going to switch to our color, which in this case it's going to be black with a sheet. I try to reuse my gloves as much as possible just because it's efficient and it's not that hard to put them back on if you take them off easily enough. Now if this was like polyurethane or something, it'd be a much different story. They don't last that long usually. also use old spines that just, are either outdated or I can't find a good match, or they got some kind of stain issue with them. And I use them as my stir sticks. Further, using as much scrap as I possibly can, save money where I can, be as efficient as possible. It's my favorite thing. Now, some people have asked me, why don't you just stain one whole sheet one color and then cut all the parts you need and then just take the parts? Because as you'll see later on in the process, there's a number of factors of why I can't do that. Partially because the wood sheets themselves vary in thickness enough to a point that they can actually affect how the book assembles, to the point that it's actually way easier to just pull everything off the laser for one book all at once, rather than trying to go and hunt down literally about 400 different pieces from a variety of boxes that I would either have to sort them into, or change them into, or recut if I'm missing one critical piece kind of thing. Whereas this way I know every piece is cut, usually with a few extras of certain pieces that I know that can get lost or damaged. And that way I never really have to worry about trying to match things either, because half the time the stain will look vastly different between batches of mixed dye, because I got to mix it every so often. So that can actually affect things quite greatly too. Sometimes the black goes on a little purple too, which is weird, but if I give it a second coat or let it settle, it usually goes pretty dark pretty quick. And that is the back side. Now, depending on which laser I throw the sheet onto, this one is going to be going on the EcoFlex. So the black section doesn't need to be anywhere near as big half the time, and also because it's a 5-page, whereas if it's a 7-page, I can only really throw those onto the OptiFlex, which is the bigger of the two machines, which you'll see in a bit. And that is a lot more precise in where I have to really specifically place the stain, otherwise a piece will cross the line and then it looks a little bad or whatever. But a lot of pieces are also internal, so if a piece does cross the line, I usually make sure it's an internal piece that can't be seen. This part sucks, partially because the polyurethane mixes with the water-based dye and will spread, so I have to use essentially a whole bunch of different stain sets, or sponges if you will, to match the proper coloration. That poly good mix. This is also a water-based poly, so it's not as toxic, but I definitely should be probably wearing some ventilation. So I'll be right back. And I apologize, you're not going to be able to hear me while I have this on, so it will be a bit quiet. Now just by the way the brown is drying, I'm going to want to actually stain it again because it's not quite even. It's not giving me a dark enough brown to actually get the engraving to look good. So I'm going to do that again real quick here before I poly it and then flip the whole sheet. Alright, next thing we're going to do is unload the lasers and get them up and running. It's going to be loud, so I'm not going to be able to talk throughout the majority of it. There is a clock in the background that will kind of help you keep track of how long just a single book takes. Generally, I'll run 7s on this one, 7 pagers, and 5 pagers on that one. I can kind of do part 7s on the Eco, but the problem with it is I'm missing a few key pieces that I'll either have to cut off on another 5-page book sheet or have a spare sheet eventually that just cuts a bunch of them, which is not very efficient. So I really do like the OptiFlex for that matter, just because it's that much bigger. It can fit a whole sheet. I don't have to cut them down, which you'll see me do here in a bit to the 5-pagers because the Eco is that much smaller. I have to take about 8 inches off of every sheet. So let's get started cutting.